Hey everyone, Azim here. We are talking about chapter 6, starting with chapter 6. It's about cartilage, osseous tissue, which is just a fancy word for saying bone tissue, and bone structure. We are starting the skeletal system. Once we go through this chapter, we'll go on talking about the bones and the rest of the skeletal system and the articulations or joints. So cartilage, the tissue of bones, osseous tissue, the bones themselves, the large whole organs, and then joints, articulations. So here we're going to understand what tissue makes up the skeletal system. First, understanding the basics of what makes up the skeleton, its framework, how it provides structure and support. We'll talk about the different types of cartilage in this first video, and we'll also eventually get to talking about different landmarks. It will be identify eventually the different bones of the body. There are a lot of them. We'll get to each one by one, and it may seem like a lot, but by the end of it, you'll be experts. We'll examine the features of long bone anatomy. Long bone is a type of bone. There are other shapes of bones that we'll get to. We'll identify differences in bones and how they ossify. The term ossify means to develop bone, to get the calcification, to become hard and grow. And we'll also, of course, look at their histology and the chemical composition of what bones are made of, and how that is relevant. Why is milk really good for you, for your bones? What else could be good? We'll take a look into that. Bones and our skeletal system are really interesting. And when I say skeletal system, I also include cartilage here. I have a few metaphors here. The first example here is a house under construction. You can see that this house has already been built. This part of the house is already built, but they're just building an addition on it. Let's say you have a house and you're building an addition. In order to do this, in order to make your house have a second floor, you have to first break apart parts of your house in order to add the addition. You're destroying before you can cause addition. You're destroying before adding. Bones, our bones are a lot like this. If we want to add more bone, we often first have to destroy bone. I know that sounds exaggerated, but it's at a very it's a very slow pace, and it does so to make ensuring that our bones are never fully brittle unless there's some kind of condition going on, which we will get to some examples of bone conditions. Our bones, in order to grow, often have to get removed a bit first. We have to destroy parts of our bone. At the tissue level of bone, we'll see that bone is very hard like concrete thanks to the calcified matrix. Calcium is super important for bones. That's what makes it really hard. So the calcium is just like the concrete. But when you pour concrete, I'm no concrete expert, but when you pour concrete, builders, construction workers often put this metal rebar. This metal rebar acts as a framework and also provides some flexibility to the concrete. Without this metal rebar, the concrete, if it were to experience some swaying, it could easily just crack and become brittle and fall apart easily. The rebar helps reinforce it and allow some flexibility in this structure. If we only had bones made of calcium, our bones would be extremely brittle. By having special proteins, collagen in our bone, by having special proteins in our bone, that allows some flexibility and reinforcement. We'll take a look at the extracellular matrix of bone, calcium phosphate and collagen. Finally, the last thing we'll get to is development. This is an early stage fetus. Sorry, I don't have the exact number here, but very early. You can see that The skeleton is starting to form. You can see some ribs here, but some parts of the skeleton have not fully formed. You can see straight through the skull. There's no bone there. There's connective tissue there. It's not bone yet. Same for a lot of the limbs. Do you see how there's this part of the knee that's not even present? There's no bone inside of the knee. There's no bone there yet. It has not developed. It has not yet ossified. It develops later, but even then it's not fully ossified. We're going to go over the different types of ossification and which bones develop in different ways. Once again, for instance, you can see ribs and the scapula already developed, starting to develop, I should say, still developing. But things like these long bones aren't fully developed. We'll take a look at the different types of ossification and why each one exists. So there's a lot to go through in this chapter. Let's go through one by one, starting with cartilage, or starting with the skeletal system as a whole and then cartilage. Hopefully I've made it clear to you that the skeletal system is dynamic. It's changeable. When you put up a scaffold for a building or when you build a framework for a house, you want that framework to stay put and never change, unless you have that addition. But what our bones are like, even when we're fully grown adults, there's constant addition and removal from our bone. There's constant addition, there's constant removal, there's healing and repair. Our skeletal system is dynamic. And the way it can do this is because our bones are living tissue. The calcium phosphate of our bones, that's not living, but there are cells in our bones. Bone is a living tissue. Our skeletal system provides support and leverage and protection. I hope this makes sense. We have support to hold up our body. We have protection for our organs. We have leverage so that we can lift things with our arms or move things with our legs. Our muscles interact with our bones. Our skeletal muscles interact with our bones to produce movement. A lot of things we can do with our skeletal system. That's what I point out with these cavities. These cavities provide protection, they provide a framework, they provide support. Calcium, specifically calcium ion, and it's represented as a capital C, lowercase a, superscript 2 plus, Ca2 plus, that's calcium ion. That's what we find in our bone, calcium ion. Calcium ion in our bone combines with another ion. It's called phosphate. Capital P, capital O, subscript 4, superscript 3 minus. The plus and minus just has to do with the charge of the ion. We're not going to get too much into chemistry, but the fact that there's a positive and a negative next to each other, they attract each other. Positive and negative opposites attract in chemistry. So you have this calcium ion, you have phosphate ions. What they do is that they combine together and create this crazy network of bone. And these ions are really strong together. They really create a nice, strong substance. That's what our bones are made of. But these ions are also very useful in other places. Our neurons use calcium, our muscles use calcium, every cell uses calcium, every cell uses phosphate. So we need these ions elsewhere also. If we are low in our diet for these ions, we can take these minerals away from our bone. Remember I said that we can remove from our bone. We can remove calcium, we can remove phosphate from our bone and use it in cells that might need it. If you had to choose, not ideal, but if you had to choose whether your neurons are functioning or your bones are strong, for survival, you'd want your neurons functioning. So you take away calcium and phosphate from your bones. Hopefully you'd refill later on. Bones are also the site of blood cell production. When I say blood cells, I mean erythrocytes, red blood cells, the ones that carry oxygen, leukocytes, white blood cells, the ones that defend us from invaders like bacteria and viruses, and also fragments of cells called platelets, the things that help us clot. All three of those things come from our bone marrow, red bone marrow. So we're going to take a look at red bone marrow as well. I forgot to mention this. We're going to get to this later, but we can regulate calcium because of hormones. There's lots of different hormones in our body to regulate calcium levels. That's going to be for the endocrine chapter. We've gone over in the past chapter many different connective tissue types. The skeletal system is made of connective tissues primarily. There's blood vessels, there's nervous tissue, but the main thing that makes up the skeletal system are what follows here. Of course, there's bone, of course, there's cartilage. Those are two types of connective tissues. I just said that red bone marrow, what makes blood cells, is found in bone, so therefore that's a connective tissue, but blood and bone marrow are connective tissues. There's something called yellow bone marrow, which we'll get to. Yellow bone marrow, it's basically just fat. It's a fat storage area. So we also find adipose in our bone, some bones. We'll talk about where. Connecting bones, we have connecting bones to muscles, we have tendons. Connecting bones to bones, we have ligaments. And then covering bones, we have sheaths. All of this is made of dense, regular connective tissue. So as you can see, there's many different connective tissues making up bone as a whole. There's cartilage protecting the ends of bones, bone in the middle, red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow inside of bone, and then on the outside of bone, you have dense, regular connective tissue. We'll also see how cartilage provides a framework for ossification, the framework for making more bone, at least for certain bones. What all of these have in common, being connective tissues, they all come from mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is the embryonic connective tissue that leads to any one of this. It could lead to any one of these connective tissues. And if you recall, which embryonic germ layer would mesenchyme come from? Would it come from ectoderm, mesoderm, or endoderm? It would come from mesoderm. So when we take a look at the histology of bone, we'll be able to recognize fibroblasts or adipocytes or chondrocytes or osteoblasts and osteocytes. We're going to take a look at these cells, as well as red bone marrow. Looking at cartilage first. Overall, the purpose of cartilage is to resist friction, resist compression, and also to stretch out a little bit. It's a supportive but more forgiving structure than bone. It's not as strong as bone. It can compress more than bone. It can be more flexible than bone. In some cases, be super flexible, like the cartilage we find in our ears, or less flexible, like the cartilage we find in between our intervertebral discs. They are the intervertebral discs in between the vertebrae to provide support against all the stress that gravity pulls down. As a whole, what cartilage is made of, the living part of cartilage, you have chondroblasts and chondrocytes. Chondroblasts are found on the outer portions of the tissue. We're looking at histology here at the bottom right, or on the right side. This outer portion that I just circled with green, this outer portion is called the perichondrium. Peri means to the outside, like a perimeter. Chondro, this prefix chondro means cartilage. Chondro means cartilage. So perichondrium is the outer portion of cartilage. It's where you find chondroblasts. See all these dark little nuclei? Those are the chondroblasts. The word blast, the root word blast, means a cell that is earlier in development and can produce a lot. The root word blast implies a cell that is earlier in development and can produce a lot of stuff. In this case, chondroblasts can produce a lot of cartilage. The way that I remember this is that blasts build. We saw that with fibroblasts build all the collagen or reticular fibers or elastic fibers or the other dense or connective tissues proper. Here, chondroblasts are building the extracellular matrix of cartilage. One more thing about this perichondrium. In the perichondrium, we can find blood vessels. There are blood vessels here, which makes sense because chondroblasts do a lot. They need to build a lot, and to build a lot, that takes a lot of energy. And if something takes a lot of energy, you need a lot of oxygen, you need a lot of nutrients. So blood supply is important here for the perichondrium. When chondroblasts are producing something, the thing that they're producing, the extracellular matrix that they're producing, has to produce a substance that can resist friction, compression, and stretch. So what molecules can do that? The number one molecule that's amazing in all these things is water. H2O. Water is really, really good at resisting friction, compression, and stretch. If you've ever jumped in a pool, maybe not belly flopping, but that allows you to lessen your impact, give or take, depending on the height, and again, depending on the surface area where when you make contact. But we use hydraulics to lift things up and down. We have water beds that really softens the blow. Water is great at really minimizing all these hard things in some cases. What else can we use? There are special proteins that allow for resisting friction, compression, and stretch. One protein is called, or one class of proteins, I should say. A class of proteins are called proteoglycans. Proteo refers to protein, glycan refers to carbohydrate. I want you to know the term proteoglycans. It's a class of molecules that allow for resisting compression and stretch. You may have heard of some examples of proteoglycans. Maybe if you take supplements or give some to your dog and seen them in the supplement section of the store. Chondroitin is one example of a proteoglycan, and then the other one that you've probably seen if you've been through that aisle is glucosamine. Chondroitin and glucosamine, those are examples of proteoglycans. I only want you to know the word proteoglycan. If you know the other two, great, but I'm not going to test you on it. And then third, the other major thing we find in the extracellular matrix produced by these chondroblasts, secreted by exocytosis, is collagen. Remember collagen? It's great at being both flexible yet supportive. So throw that in there. If you look at the cartilage here on the right side, the cells we'll get to in a second, the cells are the dark ones, but in between, I know you can't see the actual fibers or anything, but there's water here, there's proteoglycans, and there's collagen all throughout that interstitial area, the extracellular matrix of this cartilage. The living things, the cells, are separated, very characteristic of connective tissue, and in between you've got these extracellular matrix items. What you don't find in that area are blood vessels. You do find blood vessels in the perichondrium. You do not find blood vessels in the extracellular matrix of the cartilage. It is avascular. So it's just like epidermis. It's just like epithelium. It is avascular. It is also aneural. It does not have any nerves running through the cartilage. It is avascular without blood vessels. It is aneural without nerve endings. What this means is you might not feel pain, at least in that area, but if you damage your cartilage, you probably feel it towards the edges. I know that when I tore my ligament, I tore my ACL in my knee. I guess that's a ligament. But similar, there's no blood vessels there. You don't really feel pain from that per se, but you might feel pain from other things around it. I actually tore my meniscus too. Anyways. It also means, because it's avascular, that it doesn't heal very well. You do have blood vessels here to the outside, and in some cases you might have blood vessels that kind of creep in, but it doesn't go in very far. Oxygen, for instance, if it comes from blood vessels in the perichondrium, can slowly make their way through the extracellular matrix to cells, but it's very slow because of that, because it's just going through this really dense extracellular matrix. So there's limited repair. It doesn't heal well. There's continued research on this, however. So what I'm saying right now might be wrong, and hopefully for the better. There's a lot that we still don't know about how cartilage repairs and what's the best for healing cartilage. So where are the actual living things? The living cells, the chondrocytes, are those dark dots you see here. And what's funny about these cells is that, okay, let's say I have a cell right here. Here is its plasma membrane. Surrounding it, what I'm drawing here in blue is the extracellular matrix. Surrounding our chondrocyte is extracellular matrix, but there's this gap. There's this white area. So you see this white area over, I'm going to draw it in pink. Like this white area here, or here, or here, or here, or here. All these little white areas, those are called lacunae. Singular lacuna, plural lacunae. It's the space in which a chondrocyte sits. What happens is, let's say you are a chondroblast. Remember, chondroblast means early in development. Oops. You're a chondroblast early in development. And you can see I've drawn the nucleus and I've drawn the cell membrane, the plasma membrane. That's what that green line is around the circle. That's my chondroblast. The goal of chondroblast is to produce water or secrete water, proteoglycans, and collagen, and put it all around itself. So it starts secreting. It secretes some over here. It secretes some over here. It secretes some over here. Eventually, in 3 dimensions, it's going to completely wall itself off. Secretes over here, secretes over here, 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 here. Eventually, it completely walls itself off. At that point, when it's fully surrounded, we can now call it a chondrocyte. Chondroblasts mature into chondrocytes. We weren't able to tell the difference between fibroblasts and fibrocytes just based on histology. We can tell the difference between chondroblasts and chondrocytes. Chondroblasts are always in the perichondrium. Chondroblasts are always in the perichondrium. Chondrocytes are always within lacunae. Chondroblasts are always in the perichondrium. Chondrocytes are always within lacunae. Also forgot to mention, growth of cartilage slows in a young adulthood, 18 to 20 years of age. Once again, more research is going into this as to what the potential is for healing. Hopefully they find something sooner than later. There are 3 types of cartilage. This first one is called hyaline cartilage. Hyaline. The word hyaline means glass-like. Hyaline means glass-like. It's firm, but it's also cushioned. Of the three cartilages that we're discussing, hyaline is the in-between one. It's not too firm, but it's not too cushioned. It's right in between. It's a bit firm, it's a bit cushioned. It's the most abundant one in our bodies. We find it in lots of places. At the ends of our bone, the word for the end of a bone where you form a joint with another bone, that's called articular cartilage. So articular cartilage is made of hyaline cartilage. We'll be talking about the growth plate. The technical word for growth plate is epiphyseal plate. If you didn't get that word, we're going to talk about it again later. So the growth plate, the epiphyseal plate, is made of hyaline cartilage. Also costal cartilage. Costal cartilage is the cartilage of your ribs. It's what connects your ribs to your sternum. So by being on the ends of bones, it provides a cushioned protection for the ends of your bones in case there's something hard hitting or you fall or something. Growth plates, we'll see how hyaline cartilage is essential as providing a framework for bones when it's still developing. Eventually, we'll see that our hyaline cartilage in our bones gets replaced by bone. And then costal cartilage, we need a bit of flexibility and firmness for our thoracic cage so we can breathe. Our chest expands, our thoracic cavity gets bigger in one part because of the flexibility of our cartilage. We'll also talk about the joints of these ribs as well that allows for this. Hyaline cartilage has those components that we discussed. It has water, it has proteoglycans, it has collagen. The collagen is too small to see in the extracellular matrix. It's there, you have to believe me, have to trust me, but the extracellular matrix just looks like this glassy, lightly colored thing. But there is water, there are proteoglycans, there is collagen in the extracellular matrix of hyaline cartilage. And once again, you can see chondrocyte within lacuna, chondrocyte lacuna, chondrocyte lacuna, chondrocyte lacuna, pretty spaced out. The second type that we're going over is called elastic cartilage, not elastic tissue. So when we talk about elastic tissue, like the type of stretchy connective tissue that we find in the walls of blood vessels, that's one thing. Elastic tissue is different than elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage does have elastic fibers, just like elastic tissue, but it also has chondrocytes surrounded by these elastic fibers. So there's a big difference. Elastic cartilage is highly flexible, tolerates repeated bending and recoil. Bend, recoil, bend, recoil, bend, recoil. You can find elastic cartilage in your outer ears, your auricles or your pinna. Your epiglottis is what covers your larynx so you don't choke when you swallow food. Those are two prime examples, and we'll go over a few more when we get to the respiratory system. But these are two prime examples where you find elastic cartilage. So it's not as abundant as hyaline. You find hyaline all over your body. You only find elastic cartilage in very specific places. When we're identifying elastic cartilage under the microscope, first, when you know you're looking at cartilage or bone, if you see cells in lacunae, cell in a lacuna, cell in a lacuna. That's how you know if you're looking at cartilage or bone. They both have lacunae and cells. How we know we're looking at elastic cartilage is that we look at the extracellular matrix now. And in the extracellular matrix, we can see dark wavy fibers that are branching. So this is somewhat unlike what we saw with elastic tissue. Elastic tissue, we had wavy lines, but mostly going the same way. Here, these are dark wavy branches going in many different directions. That's what we see in the extracellular matrix. By having these fibers spread and branch throughout, that allows for this flexibility. The histological structure of this tissue relates to its function. Our third and final type of cartilage is fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage You might see it called white fibrous cartilage. It's the same thing. I'm going to call it fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the least flexible, but the most tough. So from one end, we have elastic cartilage, not very tough, but very flexible. In the middle, we have hyaline cartilage, a little bit flexible, a little bit tough, but somewhere in between. And then here we have fibrocartilage, which is very tough and not very flexible. There's always trade-offs if you want to have something emphasized. We have fibrocartilage in very high stress areas. The areas of our body that experience the most stress are in between your vertebrae of your spine, so your intervertebral discs have a lot of stress. So that's what these things are in this picture, providing support for your vertebrae, especially the lower ones, your lumbar vertebrae. Those are really important. I hurt mine, the disc got bulged because of improper lifting or overdoing it, and that causes nerve problems. We'll get to that later. But very important. They're very strong, but there's a limit to them too. Menisci, these are in your knees. A meniscus is a ring or a C-shaped piece of fibrocartilage, and to provide a buffer for your knee. There's a lot of stress on your knees, especially as you stand. And then the pubic symphysis is where your hip bones, where your coxal bones meet on the anterior inferior portion. I can actually show you that. Let me do that real quick. I think it might help if I switch to complete anatomy. Okay, here we are in complete anatomy. I'm going to click on models. Right now, just skeleton is selected. I'm going to turn on connective tissue once. You know what? That's good. Okay. Maybe twice. There we go. So you can see in between vertebrae, 3 times? Nope, too much. Okay. In between vertebrae, you have these discs. It's strange that's not showing the whole thing, but these would be full discs. There we go. Full discs in between the bodies of vertebrae. They support a lot of weight. Those are made of fibrocartilage. The pubic symphysis, also not shown. Here it is. The pubic symphysis is right here. They call it the interpubic disc. It's the same thing. Your hips push medially and push onto that disc. So this is a nice buffer in between. Sometimes this cartilage will get stretched out for people who deliver babies. As you can imagine, you want a baby coming out from here. So that's going to take some stretching. So there is a lot of stress there too. And then at the knees, you have menisci. There's one meniscus in the right knee. You have menisci protecting as the femur sits on top of the tibia. There's a lot of weight there. Those are where you find fibrocartilage. While we're here, you can find hyaline cartilage at the ends of bones. It's not actually showing the hyaline cartilage, but it's hyaline cartilage at the ends of bones. And then the ribs, I mentioned costal cartilage. There's costal cartilage connecting the ribs to the sternum. Examples where you can find elastic cartilage, the external ear, of course. And then the epiglottis, which is hiding. Let me hide the mandible. The epiglottis is right here. See that in green? Whoops. So the epiglottis is made of elastic cartilage. There. All right. Let me finish talking about fibrocartilage. I'm going to go back to the slides. Fibrocartilage, in order to be tough and inflexible, its collagen is prominent and goes in one direction. Remember how we had dense regular connective tissue and all the collagen went in one direction and was very strong in that direction? Fibrocartilage is just like that. It's cartilage. We see chondrocytes inside of lacunae, but we also have collagen going mostly in one direction, providing a lot of strength in that direction. There is no perichondrium for fibrocartilage, so this heals very poorly. It can heal to some extent, and again, there's more research going into this. So hopefully there's something updated when you're watching this. But there's no perichondrium, or not much of it, so it heals very, very poorly. So very, very little blood supply coming to it. So that's how you identify the difference in terms of histology. Oh, sorry, let me say one more thing. Fibrocartilage is very tough in that direction, but that means in an opposing direction, or I should say the perpendicular direction of the fibers, it's not going to be as tough. I tore my meniscus because I twisted my knee. My knees, the meniscus of the knee is good for pressing in like this, but it's not good for twisting. Same for your intervertebral disc, same for your pubic symphysis. Twisting motions are going to damage the fibrocartilage. To identify fibrocartilage, look for the dark collagen lines going mostly in one direction. For elastic cartilage, look for the branching ones. For hyaline cartilage, look for a glossy, glassy appearance. What they all have in common, they all have chondrocytes within lacunae. Here's the summary of where you can find all that. Hyaline cartilage is found in all kinds of places, at your joints, costal cartilage, your nose, more joints. Fibrocartilage is found in your knees, the menisci, pubic symphysis, and your intervertebral discs. And your elastic cartilage is found in your auricles of your ear and your epiglottis to protect you from choking. All right, those are the first 10 slides of chapter 6. We'll get to more about the skeletal system in the next videos. So let me know if you have any questions, leave comments here or in the discussion. I'll see you in a little bit.